Thank you for joining us. I don't know if this is your first or second time, but this is our second episode of Business of Family. And today we're discussing protecting the matriarch and patriarch of the family, the leadership of family offices. With me is Kelly Maregni from Pathstone. Thanks for joining us, Kelly.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
Yeah, so, just so those people who are watching, this all came about today. Kelly and I have had a couple of conversations, and we were talking about sort of the paradigms, the things that people in family offices and the generations, what they hold on to, are so important. I know of one family in particular where the first generation immigrated here from Europe and started a small business selling pickles in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, ultimately went into an import business in Asia, which at the time was known as the Orient. And he'd go back and forth to the Orient and bring toys, kids' toys and little knickknacks from the Orient, sold them. It turned into quite a significant business. And he had a very hard work ethic. He had immigrated, was Jewish, and it was a very strong work ethic, and it guided the family. Ultimately, he turned it over to his children, and they turned it over to their children, and the business is now in its third generation. But at one point, he was flying back from Asia, and he had just tasted his first sushi. And when he arrived back at home, he opened up his valise and he had some sushi there and woke everybody up in the family to come downstairs and taste sushi for the first time. So when the family gets together for meals, there's often sushi at the table because it reminds them of Grandpa Sam and what that was about. So that's some of the guiding stories that families have. And it leads to certain work ethics. When decisions have to be made, people wonder, what would Grandpa Sam have done? What would Sam have done in this situation? And those are the ways that the family stories start to shape the generations, the way that families come together with marriages, with births, what kinds of tools family use, whether to use a prenuptial or not. These are decisions that come together based upon families. Kelly, tell me a little bit about what you do about Pathstone, and also just lead that right into what you feel about families and the stories that you've seen.
Great, thank you. And I love that story, Lisa. I think it really captures what I love about what I do. So Pathstone is really simply, it's a family office for multiple families. And so what's a family office, right? And simply it's the organization that runs the family's wealth and financial affairs. And what I have found in my career is that intersects with everything in your life, from education planning to planning for marriage, unfortunately planning for divorce, all of these different areas. And we're unique in that we really started out of the idea. Steve Braverman, who's our co-CEO and was managing his family's investments, saw a need in the marketplace to bring all of these other things, inclusive of investments, but tax, estate, governance, all of this philanthropic planning under one house. And so that's really how we've evolved into this multifamily office and creating a suite of family office services in addition to our investment services. We have an 8-page service metrics that has evolved over time as the needs of our families. 200 families across 10 offices have evolved. And so it's, you mentioned sushi. We've got this list of services in each family, because every family is different, every family is unique, can kind of check off like a sushi menu, the areas that they're particular and specific to their family of what they need. It's like a little bento box of family office services. And so what I do for Pathstone, I'm the Chief Advisory Officer, and I like to say that my first love and passion is working with multi-generational families. In any given day, earlier just before this call, I was speaking with a family about year-end charitable planning and gifting, where the family wants to do, how we'll structure that. Will it go through a DAF? Will it go through the family foundation? That's really what brings me joy. And we're doing planning that obviously impacts their financial picture, but it impacts their legacy as well. The family, we were working with the family matriarch, but the call really came about because one of their children said, I really want you to help take care of mom on this, help her sort through this. So that's sort of my first love and passion about what I do. And then in addition to that, as my role as Chief Advisory Officer, I'm really working with all of our advisors in delivering the best and most consistent client experience. And what we at Pathstone have acknowledged is in doing that, our greatest asset is our people, right? And we want to help them grow. And so creating a career path, which ultimately helps us deliver on this multi-generational promise to our clients. And so when I think about that, it's interesting because had you asked me or told me 30 years ago that I would be the Chief Advisory Officer for a $22 billion multifamily office, I would have probably first asked you, what is that? I kind of had this winding career path. I really got started working for a small private equity firm that specialized in Latin American investments because I could speak a little bit of Spanish. And I think because I've sort of taken this winding path, I've always sort of been challenged with, is this what I'm really meant to be doing? Is this the right career for me? And the moment that struck me was about 7 years ago. And I can say it was 7 years ago because I was pregnant for the first time with twins. And I walked into a family's home. And it was at that meeting that we were actually having the conversation with the 3 adult children about the family's wealth. For the first time, they were revealing to them sort of really the significance of the family's wealth. And not only was it the 3 adult children, it was all of their spouses. And I walked in and one of the spouses came up to me and she was also pregnant and she bumped bellies with me. And that just had this most impactful moment for me because it hit me. It wasn't about the stacks of reports and papers and financial statements that we were bringing. It was really about helping families preserve their legacy. And since then, with that family, over the last 7 years, we've helped them set up gift trusts and GSTs. We've helped them start, the second generation to start new businesses. What we do is so impactful in the families and helping them create their legacy.
Thank you. That's just an incredible story. Thanks for sharing that. How do you assist the families to set their values and their missions? How do you use family history to insulate and contain the family?
I think, Lisa, it's really about communication, right? And really creating those bonds and relationships with those families. We like to say, if you've met one family office, you've met one family office because they're all so unique and different. And so our role is really helping to provide a platform for families to create good communication, to create good best practices before you really need to implement them. Just a few weeks ago, I was working with a family that got shared real estate, and they said, I have been suggesting that they do a family meeting, right, to go over and discuss the family bylaws, how you're scheduling time there, who's taking care of maintenance. And they said, well, we have good communication. And right now it's G1 with the siblings. And I said to them, I know, but in 10 years, when this is being run by all the cousins, you want to help establish that foundation. So I think our role is really helping them create good platforms for communication, helping to formalize and memorialize those values is really, really a crucial piece to that.
It is crucial. And it's been such an amazing year. You mentioned having meetings. I'm sure in this crazy year, you've been having a lot of meetings by Zoom with family. It must be easier to bring the families together, easier than ever. Nobody's traveling. You don't have to set and designate times and places and hotel rooms. Is it a lot easier now?
I would say that has been something, that's a silver lining, right? That we're seeing that with families that we've been encouraging them to adopt the principle of a regular family meeting. It has been so much easier to do that, to coordinate schedules in different time zones, to not have to coordinate travel. I really think this is at least, for what we do, this is something that we're going to take away from this as is really impactful and really beneficial to the industry and to the families that we serve.
Yeah. It has been an incredible year for me as a lawyer as well. And for those who may not know, I'm with Burns and Levinson, and Burns and Levinson is a full service firm. We have about 125 lawyers in the private clients group area, which includes estate planning, estate litigation, strategic family advisory services, domestic relations, which includes divorce and custody work. We've got IP litigation and transactional corporate, both transactional as well as business litigation, and real estate, commercial and residential. So we have quite the breadth and scope of different practice areas. And the pandemic has been interesting for us as well. We've done our executive committee meetings and our partnership meetings and our practice group meetings all by Zoom. So we're doing the same thing as we're doing here. And we're meeting with our clients by Zoom as well. The pandemic has been, for some of our clients, pretty crushing. So, I happen to handle a lot of divorces presently for families that have businesses. And those businesses have been so impacted. I'm sure you've seen the same situation in this pandemic. I've got one individual that I'm representing who has a family business that includes restaurants. And the restaurant industry was, if not decimated, completely altered. And some of those, there's many restaurants, and some of those have not survived, and some have survived doing takeout and delivery. And it's just a completely different thing. I've got another client who has a significant set of medical practices as part of the family business, and that has been impacted as well. So in the middle of the pandemic, even though there's ease in terms of our communication and bringing people together, the issues, the valuation issues, they have become so challenging. I'm sure you've seen this. What have you seen at Pathstone in terms of valuation and the impact that the pandemic has had on family business?
Well, I would say the greatest thing, and again, I want to take away some of the positives to this, is the resilience and the ability to pivot for families and family-owned businesses. And I think, again, it really, it speaks to how families want to preserve that legacy. And I think it speaks to, it's starting to help, and I think accelerated families talking about continuity and succession planning within the family business. And so I think we are fielding a lot of questions around those aspects and those areas, as I'm sure that you have as well, on transitioning family businesses and what that looks like, because I think that this environment that we're in has made it, all too clear that having a solid succession plan, particularly for family businesses, is incredibly important. And not only having the plan, but having that plan communicated to everyone that's involved. And so I definitely would be curious to hear from you of what types of planning on the legal side you've been seeing accelerated for families around this type of succession planning.
Yeah, so there has been a good amount of succession planning, and I think initially people were racing to make gifts right before our president-elect Biden took office. I think, between the pandemic year and the election year, it has been an incredible year. And so I had initially a lot of people coming to do some end of year gifting. It reminded me a lot of 2012. Right at the very end of 2012, we had an opportunity to make big gifts and to really minimize, the estate tax issues and the impact, and do some real good tax minimization strategies. And many of us stayed in the office on New Year's Eve of 2012, right before 2013. We were in the office and we were still drafting trusts, and we had clients coming and we were signing them. And I thought that was what we were going to see. So in the week or two before the election, we saw a real uptick in this gifting issue. But here we are, we've got Biden, who is going to be in office, President-elect Biden. And the transition to the White House, I think, is going to be ultimately smoother than I think we'd all initially anticipated, because there was so much publicity about this. There was a lot of concern that he was going to reduce the estate tax lifetime exemption, which is currently set. I know it's currently set at 11,580,000. So figure 11 million. The concern was it was going to change immediately, but we don't know what's going to happen in the Senate. It's not entirely clear yet. And right now we're dealing with a pandemic. So what I'm seeing and what I'm believing and what we're discussing in our office is that we think that President-elect Biden is really going to focus in on taking care of some of the COVID issues and the difficulties that are happening in the world, and that the issue of tax reform is not going to be on the top of his to-do list. We don't know what's going to happen in the Senate. We don't know if there's going to be a rollback. We know that that federal tax law was supposed to expire in 2026. We're not sure exactly what's going to happen. It was supposed to drop back down to the $5 million level, but we'll see. I don't think anything's going to happen right away. That said, although I'm saying I don't think everybody needs to race and make gifts right now before December 31, two things. First of all, if you'd like to, we're there for you. We're happy to help.
Yes, we're planning.
Exactly. We're all planning it and we're ready for it. We're still doing the work. But I think we've got a year. I think we can wait a year on that before they start doing that kind of planning. What's your thought?
I agree with you, and I agree with you because we've been partnering with smart people like yourself on the legal side of this. But like you, that's what we've been spending so much of our time doing for the last, I would say, 3 months leading up to this. And what different than 2012, what an incredible experience, right? Because we're all doing these conversations from our bedrooms, right? So we're from our home offices with our own children running in. And I think that to me has made this planning that much more unique. What we've been experiencing, all of this uncertainty from the global pandemic, which is health related, unlike any other economic crisis that we've experienced, the political and social disruption that we've seen, I think it's been a really interesting planning experience because that bond and those relationships that you have with your clients have just become that much more personal and deeper. And so, like you, we've been having calls in anticipation that those exemptions may sunset. So we want clients to be prepared. And you mentioned the 11 million, right? But with a married couple, that's $22 million that they can potentially give away. And so there's a couple of roles that we play. One, which I think is the easy one, is putting those numbers into context for a family, right? Can you give this money? Can you give this money to the next generation and still sustain your lifestyle and your means? And that's easy. That's running projections and spreadsheets, and we can do that. But then the deeper part is having the conversation with them about what does that mean to give that money away to the next generation? How do you really feel about that? And there's so much more that goes into it than just the ability to give that. It's how does that make you feel, and what are the implications to that next generation? And I just think that the environment that we're living in has just made those conversations that much deeper with families. And there is a lot of planning around it. And we agree with you that I think it's not likely that there's that sense of urgency that we felt there might be a few months ago with Biden in the White House. But I do think it's still been really beneficial to sit down with families and have the conversation. Can I give this? If I am, what means am I giving that? Am I giving stock? Am I giving cash? And am I giving real estate? How am I gifting this? And planning for that for the future. And I have seen, despite the fact that we were doing it out of a little bit of urgency, I have really seen relief in families and having these conversations, not just with their professional advisors like myself and you, but having them among the different family members too. And what resetting the family's goals and the family's objectives. And it's been really, really impactful.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that also, now that we have the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which is known as the CARES Act, there's also some charitable planning opportunities that people can take advantage of when they're working on their wills and trusts. And along those lines, people can execute their wills and trusts and healthcare proxies and durable powers of attorney remotely. We are back in a second surge, and we can accomplish any of these estate planning executions remotely. We figured this out. You know, the notary laws changed and they were updated, and we have all become very proficient with Zoom. Initially, we did some what we called backyard and driveway kind of executions. We bring everybody to you. You know, we bring the notary, we bring the witnesses.
What was the most unique? What was the most unique setting that you did these? I would be curious.
I think a parking lot. I think a parking lot. You know, I know that doesn't sound very glamorous and it doesn't sound unique, but a parking lot has to have been you know, when you execute these significant estate plans in a parking lot, that kind of has a unique feel to it for sure. But you know,
I will tell you.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to share with you a little story about one of my favorite client pandemic moments is I was on the phone having one of these conversations with a client, and she was a bit fearful about, this is early on, about even going out, and she said, and I've run out of milk. And it just so happens that my husband was actually at Whole Foods waiting in line, because this is back when they were only allowing so many people. And so he ran and dropped milk off to one of our clients. So amid a conversation about do I you know, give $5 million to my children, we were dropping off milk as well. So Pathstone is truly full service in that regard.
Yes, that's exactly what's happened. Everything has a really basic home feel about it, everything we're doing. Absolutely. And one of the things that people have come to me for in terms of estate planning is not just wills and trusts, but healthcare proxies, durable powers of attorney. And there's a document that I haven't really used much in my career, but I do sometimes when there's issues concerning a parent. And now that we have coronavirus as a threat, people are once again thinking about guardianship proxies for minors. It's a document that parents can sign. It's a quick document. It's not a big deal. And you sign it up in connection with the rest of your estate plan, or you could sign it up as a freestanding document. You don't even need to redo your estate plan. And it enables somebody to make decisions for your children in the event that you become ill. And this, you know, I used to use this in a situation where there might be one spouse with a compromising, let's say, addiction or physical illness or a mental illness, and the other parent was afraid that what if something happens to them? Who's going to make decisions and take care of the kids? But now that COVID is a concern for families, I'm seeing an uptick in that document as well. So estate planning it's happening. It has a new flavor. It has a sense of family, like the basics of family. So it's new, but it's the same thing. But tell us, in terms of family, tell us about what problems that you see, Kelly, that typically arise in life's typical milestones and transitions, the births, the deaths, the marriages, the divorces. What are you seeing lately in terms of the way people are living their lives and the situations that families are encountering right now?
I mean, I think that the problems and challenges that families are encountering are the same. I just think that, like everything else, this environment has accentuated and amplified some of those. And again, how we're helping with families, we've had to pivot on that, and we're thinking things through in a very different way. You know, as you just brought up, you know, really unfortunately, the fear of death and passing away, I think that has provoked families to, which I think again is really a silver lining, to take a look at their estate plans and how they're planning for the next generation. You know, typical for us, a lot of the things that we see as challenges for families at these different milestones. How do I bring in my spouse into this, or do I bring in my spouse into understanding what the family's wealth is? So we've been experiencing a lot more of that as we're gathering for family meetings in the event that, you know, we want them to be aware, we want them to be knowledgeable on the family's wealth. but it's maybe not been an area that the matriarch and patriarch were necessarily comfortable with. But now that there is this fear, people are bringing in and people are being more transparent. And I think that that again is a positive aspect of the environment that we're living in. I would say wealth protection is certainly something that our families are very concerned about. You know, in the event that they have an untimely passing, is my family protected? Are they prepared for my death? And so we've been doing a lot more around that and working with, again, good partners like yourself. So I would certainly be curious if you've been seeing any different trends within the estate planning or protection of what you're doing for families as well.
Yes, so I saw something that was of concern to me last spring. Spring is usually my, what I call prenuptial season. That's a time when people are coming to me to start doing their prenuptial planning. And a lot of the plans for big weddings and big destination weddings were canceled last spring. I had a lot of clients say, you know, we're just going to postpone it. Or I had clients who said, we're going to postpone it. And then they said, nope, we're going to do it in the backyard. We're going to keep it small. I know of one couple who actually did go to Nantucket and got married there. But that is the rarer situation. I think most people just got married quickly and quietly and decided to have a larger reception when the pandemic subsides, when there's a vaccine or more herd immunity from a vaccine. But what happened in that was a tricky situation. A lot of people decided not to do their prenuptial planning because they were shifting and pivoting too fast and not thinking about what they need to do. They were canceling the photographer and canceling the wedding site, and they were canceling the hotels and the destinations and the whole thing. People were bringing it literally to their backyards and having very small gatherings, and prenuptial planning might not have gotten done. I had a lot of people start the conversation, never continue it. And I now have somebody saying, you know, just emailed me recently saying, I need to get this done. I know there's a lot of married couples out there right now who didn't do it and who should probably think about postnuptial planning, because it's very important. If you have a family of wealth and there is a potential divorce in the family without this kind of protection, then technically whatever has been brought into the marriage is subject to division. The only way to really segregate it is by having a prenuptial agreement. And yes, you can have trusts, but trusts are not necessarily immune to attack, even with a spendthrift clause. So I am doing a lot of prenuptial advising now and postnuptial advising now, because the trend that I saw was for people to get married so quickly that they didn't pay attention. Yeah. And prenuptial planning is important because, you know, again, you want to separate the assets. You can actually designate with a prenuptial agreement what trusts are separate, what assets are separate, how you're going to deal with inheritances and gifts and loans, you know, how you deal with the appreciation of value, or what happens if you're going to convert something from real estate to cash or make a gift to a spouse, and that spouse then takes those assets, the gift, the cash, and turns it into a home someplace. And then what happens with that home? So as you're converting assets from one to another, or as assets are appreciating or depreciating, how does that get divided later on in a divorce if it hasn't been dealt with in advance with a prenuptial or quickly dealt with a postnuptial? That becomes a problem.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I have not, we've seen the same trend of big, elaborate destination weddings that unfortunately couldn't happen and instead took place in a courthouse or a backyard. And I think, you know, again, I think it's why it's really important to have good partners like Pathstone and like yourself, because I think we stepped in and said, you know, despite you're not having that big wedding, you still need to have the proper planning in place, and we still need to talk about the prenuptial agreements. And I think that's one aspect of what we do that is just, it's one of the more challenging conversations, right? And when we talk about multiple generations, I'm sure you've seen this. We've often have clients, the matriarch and patriarch, that will reach out and say, can you please have this conversation with my son or my daughter? And we're always there to have those conversations. I think our role, it's an interesting one where you have to balance having these deep relationships with clients, but you are meant to be that unbiased voice that can come in and really explain it, right? Explain the need for it, explain the implications if you don't have it. And then I think, but also, we're only successful in doing that and having those conversations when you can kind of put yourself in the shoes of the individual or the family that you're speaking with. And I think, again, that speaks to being that first call for families, being that trusted advisor, and being able to have those conversations. I think that the interesting aspect on the post-nuptial, I'd be curious, what does that process look like for a family?
So yes, a postnuptial is a document that's signed after a wedding, and it can be used to fix a prenuptial that didn't account for issues. It can be used to create an agreement if there is no prenuptial. It can also be used, and people don't know this, to help a marriage survive. It can make a marriage work. It can keep it together. And that's something that's so important for families. I can't tell you how many times I have, whether it's wealth managers or individual CPAs, but those first calls, a family office, somebody who is a first call, who comes to me and says that a marriage is in trouble and there's a lot at stake. There's a lot of interconnected, sophisticated planning. The spouses have some fiduciary control over significant assets. And unwinding this is going to be very tricky. It's also going to be very disruptive, and it potentially has a outward facing impact. And sometimes it's just not wise. And so a postnuptial can be used to help keep the marriage together by doing some division of assets by agreement in advance, and letting everybody know that it's going to be okay, that if the marriage doesn't work, it's going to be okay. Everybody's going to figure this out. We have planned for it in advance, and everybody can just move forward. Sometimes postnuptials are used in a situation where we have one spouse who maybe has a compromising situation. Maybe it's an addiction, maybe it's a substance addiction, or it's a mental health issue. Perhaps there's manic spending, something like that. So a postnuptial can be used to safeguard assets and to separate them and to prevent a dissipation of family wealth. People think that prenups and postnups are documents that are going to bring about a divorce, and it's just the opposite. They bring about predictability, order, security. They protect wealth, and trusts alone won't do it. But let me go back to exactly what you asked, which is the process for it. So the process is that each party really needs to be represented. If each party is not represented by counsel, there's a risk that the document is going to be determined by a court, if attacked, to be unenforceable. And that would mean that if the document is deemed to have been executed as a result of coercion or undue influence or any pressure at all, and believe me, after a 30-year marriage, if it starts to fall apart, that's pressure. The mere fact that a long-term marriage with substantial assets at stake and substantial family relations is starting to disintegrate, that's pressure in itself. And so you really need to have counsel for each party so that the parties have that you can rely on advice, and there has to be full and fair disclosure. So to your point about advising families and advising the generations about what's at stake, if you're going to enter into a prenup or postnup, there needs to be full and fair disclosure. And so I would turn to the family office and I would turn to you and say, let's figure out asset class, let's value what there is so we can make disclosure. The issue of disclosure is concerning to families too, but we can strategically we can disclose in a strategic way so that we're not laying it all out there in a haphazard way, or in a way that's going to have a lot of disclosure potentially to third parties. We can have confidentiality provisions built into it, and this is another reason why you want counsel. You need to be savvy about these. They're significant, and the mere agreement itself could bring about a potential exploitation from third parties. So you really need to make sure that the documents and the disclosures are very strategically managed and handled. And so the conversations that you're talking about are the conversations that really have to happen. Sometimes family members are hearing about their wealth for the first time in connection with prenup and postnup planning. But when you've got a postnup, you want to make sure that there's a lot of professional involvement in this to make sure that everybody truly understands what's going on. So there's no risk that somebody's going to be coerced and that the document will then be deemed to be unenforceable. And I see this with trust too. So even in trust planning, there's got to be information. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, because that's the I think the biggest challenging question that we get around this is, well, why do I need a prenuptial agreement if all of my money is held in trust? And I think, speaking to your comments and questions around disclosures, Pathstone is often brought in partnership with firms like yours in creating those financial statements and those disclosures. And there is always a question, and I would be curious to give your viewpoint on this, of do you need to disclose a future inheritance? And, again, your thoughts and comments around having a prenuptial agreement, even if all of the money is held in trust and has that protection.
Yeah, so there does need to be some disclosure. That this is always a difficult issue, whether it's in connection with the prenuptial planning or whether it's in connection with going through a divorce itself. And and the issue is, to what extent do you make disclosure, and why won't a trust protect? So a trust is vulnerable. For example, even if there is a spendthrift clause, and just in case people don't know, a spendthrift clause is a clause in the trust that says that the assets within the trust can't be used for the purpose of legal process. It can't pay a judgment, an award, and of course people think naturally about personal injury or contract claims, that kind of thing, but also it relates to divorce. That's also a legal process. And so a spendthrift clause aims to protect the trust from being used, the assets from being used in a divorce or any other type of lawsuit. But those spendthrift clauses will not, in and of themselves, immune a trust. It won't shield a trust completely. The courts are entitled to divide any assets that come into the marriage, no matter whether they come into the marriage before the marriage, during the marriage, even in that period where there may be a separation, but the parties are not yet divorced. Assets that come in at that point still are on the table and are still subject to division. I represented a physician years ago, and the wife's family had significant assets. She'd never worked and never had to, and that was fine. That was part of their family paradigm. She wasn't going to work, but when they divorced, she wanted alimony from my client. And in the period of their separation, they were separated for many years. And in the period of their separation, she inherited a significant amount of asset, both real estate, cash, investments. It all came in after they'd been separated and before they were divorced. And we put that on the table. And so it kind of shook up everybody to realize that, yes, that was on the table. And we did our negotiations for alimony and property division with both parties being on a far more equal footing than they would have been if she hadn't received that inheritance. So this does come in. The inheritance does need to somehow be listed as an expectancy in a prenuptial or postnuptial, but you never know. It's so contingent. You don't know the actual value. And the harder that an asset is to value, the less likely that a court is going to divide it, or the larger that a class of beneficiaries may grow. So let's say you've got a trust that leaves assets to all of your descendants, then that may grow. And so the more attenuated and tenuous it is, the more inchoate and difficult to value, and the more contingencies, the less likely a court's going to touch it. But what the court could do is the court could give everything else to the divorcing, the other spouse, and leave the trust interest with the spouse who came to the marriage with it, calling it opportunity to acquire assets in the future. So sometimes things that I find with these trusts is that even when they're left in place, so long as the family treats these trust interests with stewardship rather than weaves them into the fabric of the marriage, they're better protected. So it's not so much the spendthrift clause, it's more the course of use. So if the if the assets are being used in the marriage to support the lifestyle, that trust is far more vulnerable than if the trust is being held for stewardship purposes. Tell me what you're seeing with the families that you're representing.
So I think this conversation is so interesting, right? Because what we're talking about, a lot of it is planning during a pandemic. And what I think it really speaks to is what planning are families doing in a regular basis, right? Because we're talking about the conversations that you're having in these extreme times. And I think what it really is leading up to all of the things that you have planned for with how you're establishing trust, what the needs, the specific needs and goals of the grantor are for the trust, and how that meets the needs of the beneficiaries for the trust. And I think it really continues to speak to families having this need to really have good communication and transparency around how they're doing their estate planning, how they're doing planning, prenuptial planning or postnuptial planning. Our role really too, we see, is helping them with understanding what are your goals and objectives, and how can we work to help you find the creative solution that meets that. Do you have issues in the family with addiction, or in which you would want to have a spendthrift clause in there? How can we help the family do that? How do you help them choose a trustee? And that's a question that we've been seeing a lot of, and because you want that to be a trusted person in situations like this, who has a good relationship and has good communication with the family and can help the family alongside of you navigate times like this. So I think it really does speak to all of the planning that leads up to situations like this with families.
I agree. And it's never more important than with blended families. So what we see a lot is that we have people come into marriages for the second or third time later in life when they have accumulated significant assets. So with the blended families, there does need to be the transparency that you're talking about, and the conversations and the education, because you have people who have differing expectations for support and for care and for what it means to be part of the family and part of the family asset, and what expectation they have for the future. So with blended families, you might have step relatives and adult children from a prior relationship, or perhaps there's not going to be a second marriage. Perhaps it's a romantic interest that's a non-marital interest. And the question becomes, what do you do in that situation? So I do a lot of advising about blended families and how to make estate planning, adoption, marriage, prenuptial planning, postnuptial planning, how it all fits together, how trust planning fits together. The idea is for everything to snap together like an elegant puzzle. You want every prong to fit into every little nook, so that when a couple, when the family is going through family transition, you want this to be so well planned that you even have some elegance to it. And people, they feel like divorce and elegance are words that don't come together, but they do, So with the proper planning, we can plan for an elegant divorce. We can look at the assets in advance. So, Kelly, you and I could sit with the balance sheet. We could look at the assets. We could figure out a settlement, a divorce settlement, before anybody even files. We could together put together the architecture for a settlement proposal to the other side that lets everybody know that everybody's going to be okay, and negotiate it before anybody ever gets to the courthouse, because you never want to have to air this stuff out in public. And these days, because of the pandemic, we're doing it by Zoom. I've been in court by Zoom, but I'm using mediators ever more because you don't want to air this stuff out. And if you want to bring elegance to it, it's nice when you've got advisors as well as the lawyer coming together and planning the elegant divorce to protect the family, both internally but also externally.
You need a team, right? You need these financially successful families need a team. And I think that that is so incredibly important. And you need, a team like Pathstone that can help you with the financial projections and the modeling. And I joke about it, but that part's easy. The numbers are easy. And then you need to be having those conversations about what the goals and objectives are for the estate plan or the planning, and speaking to good partners like you about that. But I think the biggest piece for families is, well, two pieces. One is communicating that plan to the next generation and why you're doing it, right? It's why are you potentially giving more money to one family member as opposed to another? Are there special needs that you're trying to support? The most challenging conversations for us to have as advisors is after someone has passed away and the family has had no insight into what the estate plan is and what that matriarch or patriarch really intended from that. And so I think having a good team in place, having good transparency, encouraging families to have family meetings and have these conversations. And I think you mentioned it too, education is so incredibly important, and preparing that rising generation of financially successful families. At Pathstone, something that we have really acknowledged is important is engaging that rising generation. And when we talk about protecting the matriarch and patriarch, well, you're a mom, I'm a mom. The greatest way for someone to gain my trust is to take care of my children. And so I think for families, we've acknowledged we want to create an area, a safe space to educate the rising generation. We have an initiative called Future Path, which is just intended for that next generation of family members, helping them with Investments 101, helping them establish what their philanthropic goals are. We've even gone as far, and I think really as a result of the current environment and the pandemic that we're in, we've created a rising gen cohort of bringing together members of that next generation of financially successful families in creating a place where they can talk to other families with the same challenges. And it really evolves around everything that you and I have talked about today of increasing that communication and transparency between the generations and allowing them to feel empowered to then have those conversations with their team. I think it's incredibly important.
It is. And I think it also takes consultants. You'd mentioned that sometimes there are special needs and those issues do come up. So, along those lines, I would imagine that Pathstone, and in your role with Pathstone, you are probably leading people to concierge services, both medical, mental health services. Is that part of your role as well?
It absolutely is. I know I've said it several times in our conversation today, but we really do. The greatest success for us is when we are that first call. And I mentioned at the beginning that a family office really is intended to help manage your wealth and financial picture, but that intersects all areas of your life. As we've talked about marriage, divorce, estate, and certainly your medical and your health and wellness. This is an area, again, that we're really seeing that we are having an increased involvement, and we are getting that first call when a family is experiencing a significant medical or health issue or a mental health issue. And so we partner with good people and within our network who can really help us to find the right resources for families. We stand alongside of them in helping to coordinate those services. But I really think it speaks to wanting to be that first call for families and wanting to support them in all aspects of their overall health and wellness picture.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of this during the pandemic, especially. I've handled ever more guardianships and conservatorships. I've had a lot of people who've asked me to serve as trustee for their family members. So, in connection with my work, whatever kind of family advisory work I'm doing and family intervention work I'm doing and crisis management for families, very often they'll come to me afterwards and ask me to serve as a trustee for a family member or for themselves. So I've been doing that ever more. And, during the pandemic, especially in March and April, I was able to bring hot meals to people's doorsteps, including for Easter and for Passover. I had people with bringing food for people, bringing clothing, bringing bedding, whatever was needed, and also just making life comfortable, and I love doing that. I had one client who needed to have a car purchase during the pandemic, and so I took care of that for him.
Yeah.
I said, you select what you'd like. I'll get the check over there. We'll take care of this. And so I love that role as trustee. But there have been a lot of mental health issues that have come up during the pandemic, and I've been handling a lot of emergency guardianships and emergency conservatorships. I bring those to court. I've been pretty fortunate that even though the courts are closed, I've been able to get in there within 4 days. I can file a complaint. A petition is what it's called on the mental health law side. You file the petition on Monday, let's say. I've been in court on Friday. So it's been pretty quick. If you can assert the emergency, and if the court kind of knows who you are and trusts that this is an emergency and that it's not just a made up emergency, then yeah, the court will entertain you right away by Zoom or by telephone. I've been doing different things at the time. One time I had the phone ring and it was a judge and my landscaper was outside and it was loud and I had to go into the laundry room to talk to the judge and get the guardianship allowed from the laundry room because there's no windows in there. And so that was the only quiet room in the house. But yeah, so it's happening very quickly. I'm working with a lot of consultants these days, concierge type consultants. I'm sure we have the same consultants that we use. And so, using that, I'm able to help people transfer to a better psychiatric setting, sometimes a long-term placement. I can get people into the hospital if it's needed, or get people out of the hospital if it's needed, and put in place some good decision makers, whether on a temporary basis, whether on a limited basis, or whether on a very full, broad kind of guardianship or conservatorship or trusteeship. So it's happening. Yeah.
No, yeah, no, I'm laughing, and as the son, and I apologize to everyone, I'm sure I'm looking very angelic right now is what I like to think about it, but we are working in this environment, right, where you do have people, construction workers and children, and what I think that has done though, and I think has certainly helped from the standpoint of establishing and building upon those relationships with clients, is that we're all going through this together. And I think that helps to sort of break down those walls or what would be intimidating normally. I think that the outreach that we are seeing from clients, I think that they are appreciating that much more their team and their professional management. And we saw what happened in the first quarter with the markets, right? And Pathstone certainly acknowledged that we were not going to have a year like 2019 from a market perspective. And we planned ahead for that. We were underweight our equities. We had a solid cash position for clients. And so it's been so interesting to me that when my phone would ring, and I think most people imagine that I'm getting these panicked calls about the market. It wasn't that. It was clients checking in on me, right? They knew, and that reinforced to me that they knew that they were in a good place. What we have done and the relationships that we built, they knew that we were watching their portfolio. I think it speaks to professional management of assets. I think it speaks to the foundation that Pathstone has, and it sounds like your firm takes the same approach of educating clients and being proactive about what we're doing and how we're trying to support them. And I think that it's just been really, really interesting for me to see that I think that clients really in this environment have appreciated that and appreciate what we do. And I think it speaks volumes to the relationships that you have and the foundation that you've built over years of education and proactivity.
Yes, I agree. And these are typical life issues that we're discussing. These are issues that they have their natural joys, their natural sorrows, but these are typical life issues. The difference now is that it's in the overlay of a pandemic environment, and it's at a time when the world just feels very different than it used to feel. And so the same typical life transitions are happening, but they're being managed differently. And right now, I would say they're being managed more efficiently and better because we're able to pick up the pieces from our homes and take care of this and do the same thing using these Zoom platforms, even with the landscaper in the background or the sun streaming in, we're doing it. So, but it's so important because families, especially when you've got sophisticated assets and sophisticated structures, you need to know that you've got the right people in place to do the planning that's needed.
No, and I think that's so very true. And we've really seen a significant uptick in single family offices reaching out to us about their succession planning. And, we really feel that we've built out, to your point, elegant solutions at partnering with single family offices who are really taking this and thinking about what does the succession plan look like for that. And we've really stepped in a lot of those situations in helping the family navigate what are the needs. And again, I'll speak back to sort of having this matrix of services that really allows for our clients and our families to customize the solution that they need. And I think that has also been a really interesting trend and theme that we're seeing of families really taking this time to think about what the future means to their family and what types of resources and planning do they need to do.
Thank you. I agree. Kelly, I want to thank you. Kelly Maregni from Pathstone has been my guest on this second episode. Thank you so much for joining us, Kelly.
Thank you, Lisa, so much for having me. It's really been a pleasure speaking with you.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. And then everybody who's listening should keep your eyes on LinkedIn and keep your eyes on email because we're going to have our third episode in January. And it's going to involve issues that relate to families that are dealing with some very difficult issues, some of the issues that Kelly and I discussed today, but in greater depth. We're going to go into depth on the issue of special needs planning and certain benefits and services that are only available through government support and how to get that entitlement to that support if you're in a family of wealth, as well as issues relating to mental health and the impact that mental health has and how to protect a family from a mental health crisis of one of its loved ones, as well as addiction, substance abuse, eating disorder issues, some high-level issues, gambling addictions as well. And so we'll be talking about compromising issues of our loved ones. It happens in all families, and it's nothing to be ashamed about, but it is definitely something to protect against. And it requires that the family be propped up and supported at a very difficult time, a time of crisis. So I hope that you'll tune in again at our third episode, which will be in January, and we'll be announcing it soon. Kelly, thank you again. This was wonderful.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone.
If anyone needs to reach you, how do they reach you?
Oh, absolutely. And you can go to our website at pathstone.com and kmaregni@pathstone.com. So I'm happy to provide my contact information and look forward to hearing from anyone.
Terrific. And I can be reached as always at Burns and Levinson. My email address is lcukier@burnslev.com. That is LCUKIER@BURNSLEV.com. Now that we're in the pandemic, everybody has my cell phone. So no different. The cell is 617-966-9582. Again, it's 617-966-9582. Thank you, everybody, and Kelly, especially thank you to you.
Thank you,
Okay.
Lisa.
Thanks.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
day.